Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Recovery Podcast. Today's episode is serving a dual purpose. In the first half, I'll introduce you to my childhood best friend, Kyle Sears, as he gives us a brief look into his recovery story and how our friendship formed and how it's grown since recovery. The second purpose is as a TRP Topics episode, where we'll discuss fear of failures, fear of not living up to what people expect from us, and how we learn to live life in a reasonable and healthy way while remaining empathetic and grounded in reality. Hi, and thank you for checking out the Recovery Podcast, and welcome back. It's been kind of a whirlwind day for me and my guest today because I'm joined by Kyle Sears this afternoon, who was supposed to just co-host with me. He was going to co-host, and we were going to interview Randy. And those of you who have listened to the podcast know that I've talked about Kyle a lot, and I know that a lot of the people that listen are, know me and by extension know Kyle, whether that be through Celebrate Recovery here at the Village or family and friends. So it's not that I know a lot of you know who Kyle is, but it's good to actually have him on for the first time. So hey, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Feels so formal.
It does feel weird.
I feel like I just need to all right.
It seems like long and drawn out that I haven't been on it at this point yet. So
I'm used to seeing how weird your face looks, just not with the mic and headphones on.
I have a voice for radio.
That's right. You have a face for radio. Yeah, for sure. You got a pretty good podcasting voice, though.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah. So we were supposed to have Randy on today, and then Randy, I went to confirm yesterday, and he got back with me later last night and was like, I got a lot of stuff piling on right now. They've had, Randy and Carol both have had a ton of stuff going on lately, so I completely understand. So I am looking forward to having Randy on, but Kyle was gracious enough to pinch hit for me today. And we've been talking about doing your episode for a while.
Yeah.
We weren't just sure, we weren't sure what we wanted to do first. And, I know your story, and we grew up together. For those of you who don't know, Kyle and I have been friends since we were 12 or 13. So we're going on 20 years now, and we do recovery side by side, we obviously working our own programs, but we got sober within a month of each other pretty much in the same step study. And we turned around after the step study that we both got sober during and led the next step study and sell it for CR step study. And so, and just about every way we have the same sponsor, Mitch, who has been on the podcast. He had his own episode and he interviewed me for my story. And, he'll be on again for sure at some point. But just about every way we live life side by side.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. I would say I never would have been introduced to recovery probably without you. I'd probably still be stuck in the same place that I was. So it's been a journey for sure.
It has. And it was funny because when we were both struggling at the same time, really, really hard. And so but in my use, and I've talked about this before, that even during my using, I knew that CR was a place that I knew I was going to find my way back here. And so even though I wasn't sober, I knew, there were times that I was concerned, with your health. I mean, I remember, I don't want to take too much of your thunder and tell your story for you. But I remember when your drinking hit its peak, you were in a position at work, the place you used to work for, it was really stressful. And I legitimately thought you were going to have a heart attack.
Yeah. Fairly accurate.
Yeah. I mean, I was really, really concerned about your health. And, and it wasn't coming from a place of judgment because I knew that I didn't have a leg to stand on there, but genuinely as your friend, I was worried. And, so yeah, I recommended CR and then, so let's, okay. Actually, let me pump the brakes for just a second because I forgot to do my housekeeping, as I call it.
You should do that.
Before we go any further, those of you who listen know the drill. I always start by saying, while we definitely do encourage anybody on the podcast to share from their experiences from whatever recovery program they do work, none of us, myself included, or any guest, are representatives or spokespersons of the recovery programs that we may extrapolate from or speak to our experiences from. So it's because we're all fallible. We can all go back out It doesn't, and we don't speak for the program. We can speak that the programs work when you work them, but we are human, and shocker, we're all addicts or codependents. We all struggle with something when in a recovery program. Shocker. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen that story yet. So it doesn't mean the recovery programs don't work. It just means that we're human. So, and those of you who've listened to the stories know that most of the people on this podcast that have spoken to these mics we've done some crazy stuff, some really insane stuff. And working the program is the only thing that keeps a lot of us from going back, if not all of us. So I also would like to take this time to, if you would like to support the podcast, please, I've seen a ton of support, and I really appreciate it. Just liking and commenting and reposting and subscribing, depending on what platform you're on. Definitely whatever platform you listen on, whatever way there is to engage, whether that be, like I said, liking, commenting, subscribing, rating, sharing, whatever. I would encourage you, please, if you want to help, it's the biggest way that you can. And, not to make it seem like we don't have a ton of support, because we definitely do. I'm blown away, really, by the amount of people that have reached out. And so thank you. And please continue your support if you would like to support the podcast. So all that out of the way. So we just to give a kind of a little introduction into what this episode is going to look like. This is going to be what I call a TRP Topics episode. So for those of you who have maybe listened to Brett Dowdy's episode where he talked about depression, that was a topics episode where we kind of hone in on a topic and kind of delve into that specifically. If you haven't listened to that episode, I would highly recommend it. He talked about depression and mental health, and we talked a lot about how that ties into recovery. Today we're going to be talking about fear and expectations. Mm-hmm. That's something that I feel like just a little bit about, Kyle.
You can say that I'm an expert on that.
Yeah. And but at the same time, with you being on the podcast for the first time, I did want to kind of give you a chance to give your backstory and recovery. And then, we'll talk a little bit more about our background together, and then we'll jump into the topic. So why don't you start with just give us a brief kind of synopsis of your life before recovery, and then what recovery looked like when you started to engage with it.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Kyle. Grateful believer. I struggle with alcohol, depression, anxiety, fear of failure, fear of expectations, things along that nature. So I started out probably with what I would consider this normal average, childhood. Grew up, both my parents are still together to this day. I have two siblings that are older than I am. And we had the typical, what I would say, middle-class American family. Normal is different for everyone.
It's relative.
It's relative. I'll point that out for sure. But for me, like I said, that both my parents, they worked a lot as a kid. So we were kind of independent in that sense. We were kind of just running around wild most of the time, which probably had some impact on me later on. No leash. But I'd definitely say that, as I grew up, from the earliest time that I can remember, I always felt like I was out of place for sure. Like that was just always a feeling. Like I was always trying to find someone's attentions or trying to find some sense of connection to other people most of the time. And not only just, kids of my age, but my siblings and my parents. I always felt like I was trying to find a connection all the time and just couldn't get there.
Yeah, I think that's what drew you and I together in that age. Like I felt like, without saying a word, you and I recognized that we were both kind of misfits. We were both kind of out of place no matter where we were, but we fit together. And, like I had never had a best friend really. I had friends, but, we moved so much in my childhood that, about the time that my grandparents took me and my brother and I in, we started attending the same church. And then, we pretty much, it was pretty natural.
Yeah.
Just kind of clicked. And I don't think either one of us anticipated what the friendship would grow into.
No.
And
it's funny, as we started this whole episode, I thought to myself, I'm like, through all the years of friendship that we had and all of our brokenness, we never really shared in that. Like we never talked about our own difficulties at all, really, until we both were in recovery together. And then our friendship took it's still the same form, but it's a little bit different in how we go about life. So
Yeah, I think that in our friendship, we never told each other what to do.
right.
And so in some ways that, at least for our personalities, that like kind of left the door open to actually
Sure.
working recovery together, because like we would voice concerns,
Mhm.
we would fight or whatever. And it's not like we wouldn't argue about things, but you never told me what to do, which would be a terrible idea. For those of
Has
you who know
anyone told you what to do and you listen?
nowadays, it's better. It's better since recovery, but definitely not back then for sure. I had an axe to grind and a chip on my shoulder, and there was nobody that was going to tell me what to do. But yeah, it's like the framework for our relationship has stayed the same, but now we have a foundation in a shared struggle,
Mhm.
and we both know how to address that struggle. And so it's funny because the accountability aspect between you and I now, even though we never really had that before in our friendship, has been pretty seamless, pretty natural.
It's a pillar of our relationship now, I think.
Yeah, because we're both bought in to
Right.
the recovery process. We both work the same program, and so there are times when we see the other person kind of like we see some red flags. We're like, "Hey, you okay? Like you all right?
Yeah.
I think you're struggling. If you're struggling, man." And and Mitch being in that mix has been a perfect fit too.
Yeah.
Because
He just calls it right out.
yeah, like Mitch minces no words,
No.
and so which is great because I don't have the energy nor
Right.
the desire to try to figure out what somebody means.
Right.
It drives me crazy.
I don't need to sugarcoat it anyways. Like, just tell me. how I'm
Just
screwing
tell
up.
me. Yeah. even if it might upset me in the moment, I will always come back around if you're right and admit it. So when like talk about a little bit, like I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time, but I do think it's important. So I know that drinking was your DOC.
Yeah. So I think that from my childhood and kind of having that everlasting feeling of just not being able to connect with people, never being able to really feel like I could fit in, always held through, and that was up into my teen years and things along that nature. So I was always searching for something to just take away the anxiety that I had that enveloped like every relationship that I had with everyone. Up until the point where I was probably like 12 or 13, so right around the age that we probably met. I ran into you, and I had some other friends as well that, they led different lifestyles too in the same sense. And drugs and alcohol were just like something that just naturally formed in my life. And I can vividly remember the first time that I ever had alcohol. And it was like love at first sight for me. All those fears, all of the the anxiety, all that, everything that was holding me back from connecting with people seemed to just completely disappear the first drink that I took. And from that point on, I was always chasing that. It was always something that was just part of my life.
Right.
Regardless of if I wanted to or not, or if I was, spiritually moving in one direction, you know what I mean? That it was still fighting me. It was still step in step with me. So I led this very two lifestyles kind of
Right.
part of my life for as long as I can possibly remember from teenage years.
Right. Yeah. Daniel, and when Daniel Callum was on, we kind of were talking about his early recovery, and we talked about how for him with his DOC, those of you who don't like drug of choice, it was like, and for what I've realized with a lot of us is we kind of have that. It's almost like we talk about a spiritual awakening in recovery when we get sober. For a lot of us, when we engage with that first instance with our drug of choice, that's a spiritual experience in its own twisted way as well.
Yeah.
Where it's almost like it fits it like it's almost like you come to terms with all of your dysfunction and in the worst way possible. like you come to this realization that you're messed up, and that for the first time you have something that helps, quote unquote. I'm air quoting here.
It was a solution for me. It really
sure.
It was my solution to a lot of things.
Right. Like for those of you who've been in recovery, you've heard probably some variation of somebody saying, I didn't have a drug/alcohol problem. I had a drug/alcohol solution.
Yeah.
And the problems were much deeper than
Absolutely.
than the drugs and alcohol.
That's just alcohol was what aided me to disassociate from how I was feeling.
And like I knew, because I was kind of dabbling, and I didn't engage with it for a while, really.
Mm-hmm.
And but I saw you struggle with it, and one thing I noticed back then even was that, well, you were there was this duality about, because you were really engaged with church,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
really engaged with your faith growing up. You're really involved. You're always serving, and I never felt like that was a dishonest, or what's the word I'm looking for? It never felt like you were faking it.
No, yeah.
I think you were genuine engaging your faith, but you were also genuine and struggling with this other side. And so
it had to be like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type thing, because as soon as I got alcohol in me, I'm sure. I changed as a person. I know that I did.
Yeah. Uninhibited Kyle is a different Kyle. And there are some very inappropriate stories that I will not share on this podcast. But I even noticed that when we were growing up, that I saw that duality in you, and I saw the struggle that you had between the two, even though I didn't consciously recognize what it was. And again, it was kind of that kinsmanship, in that, because I was struggling in my own way. I just didn't, I hadn't found the solution, quote unquote, to that yet. And so I kind of we drank together, and a little bit and stuff, but I was in a different, it wasn't I didn't grow up around it.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I grew up around drug use with my mom, but that wasn't in my face. The consequences of it were in my face, but the using was not in my face. It was never acceptable, right? There was no, my grandparents don't drink. There was, nothing was supposed to be nothing was in the house. I was never exposed to that on a daily basis. So for you, I know it was different, not that, and I'm not saying that it wasn't like your parents were unhinged.
So
but
it was always there. It was always accessible. But even in my family, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day, is that there's no history of addiction in my family. Not that I can think of. There's no genetics, because there is a part that plays into genetics in that sense. And there wasn't something as far as a trauma or anything specifically that drove me to my use. But the funny thing is, I still had that was still part of me, whether it was my depression or anxiety or whatever it was specifically that led me to that, it was there, and it's funny when I talk about alcohol, is drugs were a part of my life too early on. I had some friends, that definitely were in that lifestyle, and luckily I didn't go down that road, but there were definitely things that I experimented with, for sure. And the crazy thing was, looking back on it, I never drifted that way. I tried things, but I never really was hooked on anything, in the sense that I always felt like I was out of control when I was using something else, which the insanity of that, when you say that in reference, I didn't feel that way about alcohol at all. It was something that I immediately just loved, every bit of it, the feeling, all of it. And to say that I wasn't in control, when I was on drugs, but I was in control when I was on alcohol, I would swear by that.
Right.
Which is insane. It truly is insane. But I think that kind of plays into the topic of today too, is fear of failure and expectations. It's this sense of wanting to control things.
Right.
And that's how I was. I felt like I couldn't control drugs, but I could control alcohol. I always felt like it was,
I don't think you're alone in that either. I think that alcohol has this, I think there's this, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with this, but culturally, we do not view drugs and alcohol the same way.
Oh, absolutely not.
Even though alcohol very much is it's not some separate entity. It is a drug, and it is a very potent drug.
Absolutely.
And the way that we approach it culturally and as a society kind of blows my mind. Like, I'm kind of like, why is alcohol this thing that we accept, but other things aren't? You know, like what? And not in the sense that I'm not advocating that we should or shouldn't. That's not what I'm going here. So don't pin me there. But it is interesting that we have drawn this line for whatever reason, and I'm sure there's a historical context. And like I said, I don't want to go super far into that.
Well, I don't think anyone has the ability to see that until you actually have a problem, and then you start to try to become sober. You know what I mean? And then it's at that point that you realize it is everywhere, and like it has such deep roots in our culture.
Oh, for sure.
That you can't get away from it. Like it's always right in your face.
Yeah, I remember stopping drinking. So I quit drinking before I got like what I consider sober, like before I surrendered my will to Christ and my higher power, and was working a program. But my drinking had gotten out of control. I remember like walking in. Before we had my second kid, I had my own room, and like I walked in and there were like 5 empty plastic gallon jugs of Evan Williams, and I'm like, that's not good. Like that's not good.
My trash can every night.
I was just like, man, nobody should be drinking whiskey out of a plastic bottle to that extent. And that was like a week, and
the
I was
light
like,
bulb went off.
I'm like, oh man. But when I quit, like I realized like, and I know we talked about this because you experienced the same thing. You walk in, like things you took for granted, like walking into a grocery store or walking into a convenience store, a gas station, wherever, watching TV, alcohol is everywhere. It is so intertwined with our society and our culture that it's like, I mean, it's everywhere. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with that, but the point I was making is that in general, people tend to have this sense that you can control alcohol more. And I guess to a certain degree, like there are plenty of people that can drink socially. Like they can go have a glass of wine with dinner. I am not one of those people.
That's not me.
Yeah. I am not one of those people.
Yeah. And that's what's funny is you talk about the duality of it, and even before of the struggles back and forth of how I was spiritually, and then with my addiction with alcohol, there's duality in the sense that I felt like I could control alcohol. When in reality, like looking back and finally being removed for it, I had no control over it. As the minute that it touched my lips, I drank until I was done.
One is too many, and 1,000's not enough.
Yeah, and that's how I lived my life in so many different ways.
Yeah, because I remember you had actually had a stretch of sobriety. Before we both really got sober. Yeah. And you were what, like 9 months?
Yep.
And you were white knuckling it.
Oh,
I knew
so
you were white knuckling it. And I remember we would have conversations where it'd be like, you know, like I don't know, like I think like I could see where maybe alcohol could have a place in my life again, and I could do it responsibly. And I'm like, I didn't outright say
you
no.
let me work my program.
But I was like, hey man, like
hold on to the idea.
I'm like, at least be open to the idea that you might not, because maybe you might come to the realization that one day you might come to the realization that alcohol will never have a place in your life. And
the realization came after 9 months when I woke up on my front lawn one night.
Dude, I laugh about that story all the time.
That's karma right there.
Because I remember you calling me and you're like, so I can't drink. I was like, oh yeah? And he was like, yeah, I woke up on my front lawn and I realized that I have a problem. And I was like, that'll do it. And so from there.
Hey, that night started out with me saying, I'm just going to have one or two.
Right. Yeah. And so kind of remind me, so that was not long before we started the step study, right?
Correct. Yep.
And so this is 2020. Kind of, we're jumping forward here as alcohol has permeated your life. It was a daily thing, and you know, as your career progressed at the place you were working, you know, you got this job that you really wanted, and then you got there and it was a total nightmare. It was super stressful, and they got kind of, you know, on the outside, I kind of got the sense that you weren't exactly set up to succeed in this job.
No, I was set up to fail from the beginning. I didn't know that.
Right.
But
it's an important thing to know.
But in hindsight, with some conversations with people, I was definitely set up to fail.
And like I said, your drinking got it was every bit daily, and
Oh, yeah.
I was concerned. I was concerned about your health, and I wasn't doing great at the time either. But as your friend, I was worried. And anyways, we kind of fast forward to this. We both kind of found ourselves at the tipping point for sure.
Yeah, and I had basically I'd gone through life trying to hold back my addiction as much as possible. And that's through a marriage, that's through a career, that's through my
Kids.
children, having my children, and everything. But I had run a path where I had not only boxed myself in, but I had the inability to see the future, hope in anything. I had run out of any hope, any gas left in the tank, and I was scrambling.
Yeah.
I truly was. It was, it was as close to feeling like I was going to die, if anything. Like people said that they could see it in my face.
Yeah.
My beard had turned dead white almost. Like it had big white streaks in it just from the amount of stress, the amount of anxiety that I was dealing with. And my only solution at the time was to drink myself to sleep every night.
Yeah.
As if that was a good solution. But I'd run in this course where I didn't know what to do. And and Matt, I finally was like, hey, I think I need some help. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea where to go next. And he was like, yeah, I know a place.
Yeah. I know a place.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how God orchestrates things. Like I said, I was not in a good place either. And I'm sure you had sensed that I was not okay, but I had never talked to you about it.
No.
And some of that was out of this sense of like, this is codependency on my part, but I knew that you needed CR, and I knew that I needed CR, even though I had zero faith that it would work for me. But I was in this weird limbo place where, as much as I told myself I didn't have faith it would work, I could not deny the work it had done in others. And so I knew if there was, like I said, I was in that same place. We were at that same place at the same time of, you get in the cycle of using and it just continues to make it worse, but you also feel like you don't have any hope. So what else are you going to do?
Right.
Like the thought of just not using and not having hope. Like honestly, I was like, I'd rather just die. Like at that point, like
I understand.
If I don't have any hope and I don't have anything to offer me any relief, then I don't want to be here anymore. Yeah. Not in the sense of suicide for me, but there were times where I would like wake up and be angry. I woke up. I was just like,
and that's what's crazy. I mean, like looking back, like I was so blind. Like I had a good career, like comparatively, I really did. Like I was blessed in that. Like I was blessed with like an amazing wife that I don't deserve. She put up with so much stuff. 2 beautiful and healthy children that are amazing and well behaved. I don't know how that happened, but it did.
It's weird.
And I had all these things in front of me that were perfect, and I couldn't see any of them. That's what's crazy about it. Like I had no gratitude in my life whatsoever, and I had no hope, and all of that was for naught because I couldn't see it. It's that irrational. Yeah. It's that effect that alcohol had on my life.
Yeah, I mean, I shared when I did my episode, and I shared it a bunch in CR, that when I had my and now infamous prayer of getting sober, that I said, God, if I'm going to give this up, you got to give me something better. And what I realized, what he made available to me as I continued to progress in my sobriety, was that everything that I needed, all of the good things, the better things, quote unquote, that I needed, were in front of me the entire time. In the same way you talked about, that I had a wife working her own recovery who stood by me when it would have been easier to leave. And I don't know, there were times that I would look at her and be like, why don't you leave? Like, just go, and I have 2 beautiful girls that I love, and, family and support system and friends. And there are a lot of people who have been in my position or worse, who didn't have CR in their back pocket to go to. And I always knew I could go back. And it's part of the reason why I started this podcast, is that hopefully somebody who is in the same spot as I was in, who doesn't know that there are places out there that genuinely work, know that there's something out there. And I hope somebody in that position hears it and finds some hope. But, so we both, like, 2020 rolls around, COVID hits, isolation, big time, especially for me. And this step study comes up. Did I invite you to that, or did somebody else?
Somebody else invited me to that, I believe. You invited me just to CR.
Yeah.
In general. And from that day, from the first time I walked in, like it was, I had made a decision that I was going to start dealing with this in some different way. And, I had a relationship with my higher power. Like I did, but I say that loosely. I was spiritually dead inside entirely.
Sure.
The relationship, at this point, I felt like that God was just cold to me.
Yeah.
Right. And I had tried to find a solution in my relationship with God without surrendering anything. And I wasn't going to make failed promises to God any longer. And because of that, the relationship pretty much just died.
Right.
And that was on me, obviously. You can say that, but like I just wasn't going to make a promise that I wasn't going to keep anymore to God.
Right.
Like I had at least enough reverence to Him for that. But I found myself in a place that first night. I sat quietly. I didn't think I talked really at all that night at all. But I went through the big group and I went through the small group and all that stuff. And I think I walked out to the parking lot with you, and you're like, "What'd you think? Are you okay?" And I was like, I just broke down. Like I was like, I'm at the end of my rope. I don't have anything left. Like, I don't know what to do. I know that I can see hope in people's eyes here, but I don't know where to go. I'm committed to being here, and that's all I could do at the time. Like I'll be here. Like I don't know. I don't even know if it's going to work at this point, but I'm going to show up. Right. So I did that for a while, and I went home that night, the first night, and I was like, "Look, God, I don't know what to do here. Like, I just need your help. Like, I need you. Like, more than I've ever needed you in my entire life, and I mean it this time. Like, it was from my heart. That's all I said. It wasn't some long drawn out thing. It wasn't like elaborate. You know what I mean? Like, I just said I need you. And at that point in time, He met me there. And it was like a little of that weight was lifted off my shoulders, that I had been piling up so much stuff in my life. And that's that wraps up into a lot with our topic today, is like this full on expectations, and the impact that it had on me with my depression and my anxiety, and the weight that I was bearing in my life was crushing me. And that first night, it took a little bit of that weight away. And like I said, it wasn't magical by any means. It's not like I didn't continue to struggle. But I was there. I was starting to buy in. And it was a long time of coming to recovery for a while, and just saying like, "Hey, I'm Kyle. I said I'm an ungrateful believer, because God, I recognized how ungrateful I was. If that's the one thing that I love about working a program, is that you get to see other people's perspectives. You're not just caught in your own, right. which is, I think, is one of the most vital parts of recovery, is being able to look at other people and be like, oh, like there's a different lens, there's a different view. And for someone that's as blind as I am, and when I'm struggling, and I'm fearing, I feel like I'm going to fail, or I have all this fear and anxiety that's driving me to want to drink. Having a different lens is one of the most vital things for me, especially for anyone that struggles with feeling like they're going to fail someone's expectations. Like, you having the ability to listen to someone else, and then to them have a different view on something, is the beginning to me getting better.
Right. Yeah, because you get, Mitch, in one of his many Mitchisms, has this saying that, like, when you get stuck in the echo chamber of your mind, even your dumbest ideas come across like Einstein level genius.
Yeah.
And in that turn, if it's you and you're stuck in isolation, you're going to tell, and you start telling yourself that things are bad and things are hopeless and that there's no way out. You only have your own voice to listen to in that moment, and I absolutely agree that there are times when I feel like, even now, when I struggle with my depression and stuff, if it weren't for coming in these rooms, I would buy into the fact that things are as bad as they feel.
Oh yeah.
And what I have learned in my recovery, and something you and I have talked about, that our feelings will lie to us.
Oh yeah, constantly.
Especially when you struggle with things like depression and anxiety, and you get this feeling like things are not okay, and it just builds and it snowballs, and until you're around somebody else that can kind of pull you out of that for that brief moment that it takes for you to kind of realign with what's actually going on, that you stop. And I find myself stopping and going, like, everything's okay. Everything's okay. Like, the sky is not falling. Like, maybe there's something to work on, or maybe there's something God's trying to tell me, or maybe there are many times where I'm like, this is just my own brain chemistry fighting me.
Yeah.
And like, I just got to grin and bear it and do what I can do through, medical help and working my program and reaching out and being honest. There are sometimes that despite my best efforts, I still feel like something's wrong. And thankfully, through recovery, I'm at least at the point where I can recognize that that's not true. And
I think that's a big part of it, is like, through recovery, I've learned to realize not to trust my emotions, not at face value.
Right.
They can mean something, but they don't necessarily have power, and they definitely don't mean they're true.
Yeah.
So, I was stuck so much in this environment of irrational thought all the time that had this impact on my self-esteem, feelings of powerlessness, all kinds of different things, that it was normal for me. It was definitely a process of going through steps,
right,
to find myself to a place where I could even, have the viewpoint to be like, oh yeah, like that's a completely irrational thought.
Yeah. And kind of to jump forward, and as we both of us get sober in the step study, and we go through the phase of finding freedom from using, but then starts the real work, right? Like, and we're both kind of working through that. We're both kind of in the same stage at the same time. That when I realized that, like, man, there's more work than just not using. Not using was honestly, it was the most intense part, but it was not the hardest part.
Nope.
And for me, it was dealing with my mental health, with my weight, with the other things that I was using as crutches, and dealing with my anger and stuff like that. And with you, I saw this different side of you when you got sober. I had never noticed your anxiety and your struggle with expectations until you got sober, because it was muted a lot by your drinking.
Absolutely.
And so in a lot of ways, you projected this opposite. This, I don't care what people think of me. I don't care about this. Like, you kind of had this, like, on just, you're going to have to forgive my French, those of you that are listening. I'm sorry to my grandma that's going to listen to this, but kind of this fuck it attitude. Like,
yeah.
And
oh, absolutely.
So it was almost like a surprise to me that I can usually tell when people are faking things, but with you, it was so ingrained. And part of that, I think was,
I think it was a safety mechanism in a lot of ways. It was this projected arrogance, because that was the only way that I felt like I could safely control the situation.
Right. And so I think there was maybe, I'm going to play Dr. Phil here for a second. I think there was even part of you that knew that people thought you were arrogant, but you would rather them think you were arrogant than that you were
weak or broken.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because you're, kind of to, like, your dad is one, things have transpired that have changed his life.
Absolutely.
But, growing up, your dad was about the most self-assured person I'd ever met. At least he came across that way. And hyper intelligent, and just not one of the guys that was wrong about things very often. And so living under this, living in the shadow of that, for sure, I could see where that would kind of be your default. But as you started to struggle with this, it became, like, that's when you and I started talking about things like, you should go talk to your doctor. Like, go find some medical help. You push back on that for
a while.
Yeah.
A while.
And so walk me through that process, and what, like, I want to hear. There are two things I want to delve into to kind of get into the topical part of this episode.
Sure.
One is your anxiety as a medical condition, and also how, and your anxiety in terms of fear and expectations from others, and failed expectations. And I want to talk about those things as they are in a vacuum, but I also want to make sure we talk about how they play off of each other, because I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the big things I think is, rooting from my childhood, like in being in that environment with, especially with my father, like I always felt like I was going to fail expectations. So it was always kind of this part of my life that I wasn't going to make it, and I heard lots of little quips all the time as a child. Like, if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all. That one jabbed me a lot as a kid. Cause I always wanted to do it right. You know what I mean? And I always
because it doesn't leave any room to actually grow and learn and
Absolutely.
fail. Failure is an important part of learning something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the hard thing is I think that there were so many times where like, I felt like doing it right was going to earn me some gratification in what people thought of me. Like if I did it right, people would think more of me. If I did it, and then if I didn't do it right, people were going to just bash me. I was just filled with shame. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that was the hard part, but that was what I had told myself from a pretty young age, I think. So, that fear was always kind of there. Like I just wasn't going to be enough in that way. And my anxiety was driven in that way. And they were subtle things. Like it didn't have to be, I can make something small into something very large pretty quickly. And that fear then leads to anxiety, and the anxiety, it's subtle. It slips in a lot of times. It's something that you don't even see a lot of times.
Right.
But, I've realized that it not only has an impact on my emotions, but it has this impact on my health as well. And I've struggled with sleep since like the earliest I can remember. Is because my brain just wants to run. It wants to run solution scenarios. That's what I would probably call them. It's just solution scenarios, and it just runs and runs and runs because I'm just afraid of what the outcome might be.
Right.
And the depression. Depression is one of those things that is you can't necessarily identify a lot of times. But I always struggled to feel a sense of happiness. You know what I mean? And that was one of the things that like alcohol gave you that fake
fleeting, but it was there.
Fleeting, yeah. I mean, it brought you some kind of happiness or like this fake emotion that felt like happiness. It was a lie. I mean, it really was, but it was there. So,
I think you can manufacture happiness, but you can't manufacture contentment.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing is when he's like putting on a different lens, going through life now and after working the steps and doing a lot of digging and work in my life, I've realized that I don't strive for happiness. I strive for contentment. That's if I can be content, that's enough for me.
Right.
I'm not guaranteed anything else. So that's a big part of it. But a wise man once told me, that would be Mitch, he said that expectations are preconceived resentments towards others or myself. And I remember the first time he told me that, like, I was like, hold on, whoa, back up. Say that again. And because he just whipped it right out. Like, he's like, oh, right there. I was like, okay. He's
always got that, man. He's Johnny on the spot with the Mitches.
Man, he is. And he said that, and I wrote it down, and I chewed on that for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And I quickly found that the preconceived resentment that I had was almost never towards other people. It was always towards myself. And this irrational fear of my failure and of failing other people's expectations was the resentment that I had towards myself. It was this, this identity issue that I had with myself, and I had such low self-esteem. Because that irrational thought always told me that I was the one that like I wasn't going to do it right. Regardless of whatever I did, I was never going to make that person happy, or I was never going to come off like I was smart enough, or I was in control, or I could have the solution. So, that was something that I recognized. Probably not soon enough in my recovery, but I worked through it to get to that point.
Right, and yeah, I remember so eventually you leave the job that you had, and you get this new job that you're currently at, and actually now I work there too, which is it's a great place to work. I just finished my 3rd week and really enjoy it, and great group of people, and it makes it funnier to me now that I've been around everybody. But when you started, so you've been there about a year, a little over a year,
A little over a year now.
a little over a year, yeah. And so you were still, we were still in our step study at that point, our second step study,
Second one. Yep.
I know for both of us kind of had character defect stuff that we were God was wanting to take us through with this step study. Even though we were leading it, we were working it as much as everybody else, and it was a good experience for both of us. And for you, I know the thing that you were working on, whether you meant to or not, was dealing with this fear of failed expectations and just navigating your character defect in that, and how, surrendering it, working through it. And I remember so many conversations when you started this new job of feeling like you would have I would sense this anxiety building. You'd be talking about this like, man, like I feel like I feel like somebody's mad at me. I feel like my boss is upset with me. I feel like I'm disappointing them. Like, I don't know, like she wants to have a meeting with me tomorrow. And what's this going to be about? And I remember like, dude, and like, but at the same time, I would hear about the things you were doing, and I would hear these new responsibilities you were getting at work, and how it was funny to me, because on the outside looking in, I'm looking at this and they're giving you more to do. And if I'm your boss, I'm not going to give you more to do if I don't think that you can do it. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, Kyle, do you ever think that maybe this is all just in your head? And you're like, maybe.
It's a possibility.
And so, eventually, like, you kind of realize, like, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. And how it was kind of like this instance of, again, like us working our separate programs, but, being honest and sharing things with each other, where you're telling me that you would have all these instances of you getting worked up and like, I feel like I'm failing, and like you would have this, I knew what it was. It was this fear of like, I knew that if you were to actually fail, whatever that means, but like catastrophically fail, it would have crushed you, and crushed you in like an immense way, in a substantial way.
Mm-hmm.
Not once did you ever hit that point. It's not that you haven't
I
made
make mistakes on a daily basis. Yeah.
But again, when you hear things in your childhood, like, if you're not going to do it right, then don't do it at all. What that doesn't do is leave room for what it's actually like to learn things, and that is that you fail along the way, and that's how you learn. Nobody got good at what they do without failing along the way. And so it's kind of, I understand the thought behind it, right? Mm-hmm. That, and because it drives me too, as somebody who struggles with being a perfectionist at things, that if I'm going to do it, I want to do it.
Right.
But but you can't, I don't know very many people that do something complex like your job, that you're the role you have at where we work, that they don't fail along the way.
Yeah.
And so for you, it was watching these instances of you getting built up and worked up about these catastrophic failures that you had built up in your mind.
Fabricated in my head.
Which, by the way, not one time could I get you to actually tell me what exactly those failures were going to be, which is a good indicator that maybe it's in your head. But after like so many instances, I'm like, man, how many times are you going to do this before you realize that you're doing fine?
Yeah. I think up to a certain point, especially in my old job, mm-hmm. I that was pre-recovery for a large part of it. It was mm-hmm. basically pre-recovery. And especially and in my personal life, both the same. I didn't know how to build healthy relationships and like healthy lines of communication.
Sure.
And if anyone knows me, I hate little acronyms. It drives me nuts. People are all the time like meeting makers make it like something. It's just so cringy to me. But one of the acronyms that, of course, you find in recovery a lot of times is how. Is I put honesty, openness, and willingness into everything that I do in my life as much as I can. Now at this point, and I went into my job, this new job, with the same thing. Mm-hmm. Is I wanted to be honest with people, and even from day one, they knew that, like, I have a past of alcohol, and they were nothing but accepting of it. And I was, my feet were pretty solid at that point when I went into this new job. So it didn't have any like massive red flags, I'd say. But I was pretty open about it, and I was, willing to learn new things and take on obstacles. And I was honest that, hey, like I struggle with expectations. And from day one, that was a conversation that my boss and me had. Is because when I started working through a lot of my character defects, Mitch had told me, he said, "Hey, I want you to do a little exercise. I want you to go out." With somebody that you feel like you're failing expectations with, or you feel like you're failing them, or the relationship is strained. At least in your mind, it is. And go to them and ask them, "Hey, what's your expectations of me, as a boss, as a friend, as a husband?" Those types of things. Go directly ask them what it is, and make sure that hey, it's not necessarily something that they need to answer right away, but ask them to think about it, and it would mean a lot to you if you did that. And I went through some people that I was struggling with, or that I felt like I was really failing their expectations, and they came back with something that was completely different. They're like, "Hey, like this is my expectations of you. I just expect you to be this, this, and this," and it's nothing what I told myself. Mm-hmm. Nothing. And that's what the insanity of it is like I had made up what I thought this relationship was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be in their eyes, and it was nothing what I thought it was.
Where do you think that came from?
I think that it came from probably childhood. My inability to connect with other kids and my inability to connect with my parents a lot of times and my siblings, I was always trying to find what I needed it to be. I was always trying to find who I needed it to be, to make them happy. After recovery now and as I've gotten older, I realize that I can't make people happy. Like I can share in happiness, I can share in emotions, but I can't give that to them.
Right.
So as I started doing those exercises, a little bit here and there, and I started to live my life with that HOW acronym of just honesty, openness, and willingness, did I start to have the perspective that I could see like how irrational that I really was. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, is like you talk about, when I first got on, like that was a time where I was really, really struggling with trying to control my character defects and trying to really learn how to live life on life's terms, is what we like to say it.
Right.
I had taken an honest, stab at that and trying to live, without me trying to control everything in my life and just do it as open as possible. And I remember having this conversation with my boss, and she's like, about expectations, and to this day we still talk about it. It's an important part of our relationship of how we communicate, and how I feel like I'm doing in my job and how she's doing as my direct leader. And it's funny is she said something to me like a couple months back. She's like, I will never, no one will ever be as hard on you as you are, and 99% of the time when you make a mistake, it far before I ever do. And you've already had a solution for it and already came up with it. Like, so there's really, it's a moot point in maybe even bringing it up in most cases, is because I already know that you're going to strive to do that, which is a great part. It is a great part that drives me to be better.
Sure. Right.
But it can also be maddening.
Right.
Because the fear of what the outcome might be of me failing is not a healthy way to drive someone. It's not. But that's how irrational it is. So it's good and it's bad in some ways. Mm-hmm. But the crazy thing is, like, finding myself and surrounding myself with the people that give me that perspective and that can honestly just stop and say, "Hey, like, you're fine." You know what? Like, it's weird. Like, I've gotten better at not trusting my emotions, and when I have an irrational thought, like, I start to inspect it before I start to put any value in it. Or before my mind starts racing to solutions. And that's great. But the one thing that even to this day that I struggle with is when someone else tells me, "Hey, you're doing a great job." My first thing in my mind is to be like, "No, that's a complete lie."
Yeah.
Like,
it's like
that's
this, like,
absolutely impossible.
There's this like imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
that, like,
absolutely.
Like, you almost feel guilty. I struggle with the same thing. And maybe for slightly different reasons. But it's like, no, like, there's somebody, for me, I take it as there's somebody out there doing it better. Mm-hmm. And so to me, if I'm not the best at it, then I'm not good at it.
Right.
where, but at the same time, there's like this imposter syndrome of like, I'm really not that good. And, like you talked about, and it's something you really are good at, where if you find something, this was one of those things that the reason why we're good friends is that I don't tend to work well around people that are good at pointing out problems but never have a solution. That drives me crazy. If like, to me, if there are issues, and specifically with things like let's say with work, that's a pretty tangible example. You offer nothing if you point out problems, but you don't ever have any solutions, because pointing out a problem is fine, but it's still a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with this kind of I had this conversation with somebody that I recently made amends with, and it was about honesty. And I struggled with, for those of you who know me are going to be super shocked, but I struggled a lot with, you can be honest and kind. It does not have to be mutually exclusive. And I think as a Christian, I think that's a requirement.
Absolutely.
And, and bear with me, because I think this I'm setting this up to apply with whatever, like with the things that you're talking about.
Right.
But with this person, I had, about, I don't know how many years ago, it was a long time ago, years and years ago, I had this conversation that I was very blunt and very honest about, where I'm just gonna make me sound like a jerk. I guess I was. And
you were a jerk. Don't.
Yeah. But I was basically like, I just don't like you. Like,
yeah.
It wasn't in my mind. It wasn't a. It's gonna sound stupid. It wasn't a personal thing. Like, it wasn't like, I think you're a bad person. It's just that our personalities didn't mesh.
You definitely have different personalities.
and so, in my mind, that makes perfect sense. I don't have an issue. If somebody doesn't like me, just as a person, it doesn't typically, like, it doesn't wreck me. Like okay, that's fine, because I have people who do, and and like, I understand that I am a specific kind of person, and I could definitely rub people the wrong way. But my honesty did not have kindness, and it hurt. And so this person actually reached out to me, and we offered. It was a good chance to make amends, and I was really grateful for the opportunity. And I said, like, honesty is like a hammer. Like, it can build you a house or it can smash your thumb.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it depends on how well you use it. And I think with what I've realized in my recovery journey, and I don't think I'm out of bounds for speaking with you about this, or kind of speaking for you a little bit about this, is a lot of our character defects aren't always just bad things.
Yep.
They're good. They're assets when used the right way. And for me, like, the thing that drives me, right, where, like, if you give me some ownership of something, I will absolutely take it to the end zone for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love it. I thrive on it. I really enjoy especially if it's like, hey, we don't know how to do this. Go learn how to do this. I love that. It drives me, but left unchecked, that turns into perfectionism. And then I find myself like, this wasn't, like, I could do something well, but because I don't do it to the standard that I think perfection is, it's total garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a terrible way to live, because it leaves me dissatisfied and frustrated.
Yeah.
When in reality, if I was objective about it, I could turn around and be like, like, was it perfect? No, I guess. Was it good? Yeah.
Right. Well, my character defect, I mean, in some ways that I've learned about myself, is that I'm an empathetic person.
Mm-hmm.
I can put myself in someone else's shoes and have empathy for them, and because of that, it drives me to help them, which is a great thing. Like, you wish people were more like that in this world.
Right.
Assuredly. But the crazy thing is when it leads to unrealistic expectations of myself. You know what I mean? The honesty part, turning to myself, is how do I be honest with myself? How do I be honest with what I feel like my character is? If I don't have a good self-image, which is probably the biggest topic that I probably have with Mitch lately, is, what's my self-image? Like,
right.
What does that look like? You know what? And if I can't be honest about that, honest on how I feel, and then honest in the sense of what other people really, what the true image is, and I'm not having the good communication with people and them telling me, hey, like, this is really how you're doing, I don't have those good relationships, then I can't move forward. Like, I can't have this good image of myself.
So to it was an interesting point. I want to clarify it. I wanted to. So when you say like, I think I'm getting an idea of what you're saying here, but because I think it's important, so I want you to clarify on it. So when you say you are an empathetic person for sure, like
Sure.
you don't tend to write people off when they act out of character defects or brokenness or whatever, and it's good because I don't know if our friendship would have survived if you hadn't.
Probably not. I'm the exact opposite way. I'm like, he's really angry at this, but that's not why he's angry. He's angry because of something else.
And I've struggled with the opposite of like, of if somebody does something completely out of bounds, I'm done. Okay, deuces, I'm out. You know, that's changed since my recovery for sure. A lot of humility has come into play. Probably not enough, but I'm sure God will figure that out. So when you say your empathy allows you to understand, are you saying it? So you're saying it is a good thing to have, but how did it go too far for you to where it affected you negatively? Was it that you were finding yourself morphing into what people needed? You thought people needed at your detriment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because my empathy leads to trying to help people, provide them something that I can't give them. And that's in the form of my identity. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I can be something that I'm not. And then, you know, at that point in time, am I telling myself lies? You know what I mean? That's when that irrational thought starts to come in. Which, like I said, it's a good thing, but it's also a bad in the sense that it drives me to ends of trying to be perfect in something.
Right.
Like I want whatever I'm producing has to be perfect because that's what I feel like that person needs. So it's this wound up anxiety, codependency, expectations.
Right. Well, because you start to stretch yourself, like you said, to providing things that you can't.
Yeah.
And so
I can provide solutions to things in a healthy manner. I can't produce how they respond. I can't give them happiness. I can't give them contentment. I can't provide them any of that stuff. I can't be that solution. I can do it on the exterior, but I can't do it on the interior part of them. And that's something that I feel like I always try to do.
Yeah, I mean, we have a mutual friend that struggles a lot, and if at the beginning of my recovery journey, I would have swore to you up and down I didn't struggle with codependency. This person in my life, for whatever reason, I struggle with it. It's a friend, and you've seen it from the outside, and you felt the effects of it directly at times. I struggle doing that. For whatever reason, with this guy, like I see the good in him, but he has a lot of pretty destructive behaviors, and tends to, for whatever reason, this codependency formed, and I mean he would affect me in such a profoundly negative way, and it would really bother me. And till I came to the realization that, like, you know what, there are things, he needs a friend. I can be his friend, but I can't be his solution. And there are things that he struggles with that I can't fix for him, in the same way that he can't fix things for me. The same way that even in our friendship, the thing that worked for us is that neither one of us tried to fix each other because we both were messed up. I think we both kind of subconsciously had this understanding that I can't fix you and you can't fix me, but we're still friends and we'll deal with it. And
misery loves company.
But yeah, and so he's kind of been my kind of banner example of how I deal with that in my own life. And
I can take that, what you just described, and I can do that with everyone around me.
Yeah.
That's what's scary about it.
Right.
Is I can quickly find myself, completely at odds with my thoughts about how I need to be that solution.
Yeah. And in certain ways, I struggle with it too, but I approach it in a different way. Where I feel like before recovery, I was only my value in any social situation was how useful I was.
Yeah.
And
I understand that.
And so it drove me to learn how to do a lot of things. Like, there was this like I like when there's a need, I like fulfilling it. Like there's a certain part of me that's ingrained in me that's a good thing, that you should be of service and be useful. For those of you who know my grandparents, they are the epitome of in the trenches, like whatever needs to be done, we are here and we are of service. And I am talking about gratitude. Like, it is something that I am so grateful for. And I don't think for as long as we have time together, I will ever be able to express to my grandparents, how much their attitude towards service and their commitment towards service and their willingness means to me and drives me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it shaped me who I am as a man. And it's something that is so valuable. It's something that is I've realized that it's important. I feel like it's a little off topic, but bear with me and I'll get us back on track. But is that the world is full of negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty easy to just pack it in and say there's nothing I can do about it. What I see in men, like, I'm going to say, like, what makes you a man. I thought about this in terms of, like, what does it look like to be a man? But I think of what it means to be a good person in general is, what are you going to do that's against that grain?
Mm-hmm. Servant leadership isn't only what you provide, it's how you go about it.
Right.
It's the emotion that you have towards it.
That's for me.
Yeah.
Where things always turn sour for me is that my motivation was off when I did these things. And so I was doing this to buy my way into social acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to earn my way into it. And it affected my relationship with God, whether I understood mentally that I could not earn my way into his grace, which is an oxymoron in and of itself. But subconsciously in my heart, that's what I was trying to do. And when I realized that I could never do it, that's when I stopped making those unfulfillable promises to God. Yep. And that's when my relationship went dead with God. Was like, I can never add up. I'm never going to do enough because I'm always going to be a screw up.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah. And so now,
and that's the thing, is holding on that is like, that's one of the biggest things that kind of like is represented when you struggle with fear of failure and expectations, is that worrying that imperfections or those shortcomings in your life are going to make other people think less of you.
Right.
God can't think less of you. And when we say that, once we really relinquish control to our higher power, it stops. There's something that stops us there. Mm-hmm. He can't think less of us. He's seen me at my worst. I don't know how he could think less of me, to be honest.
What's not that comes across, I know what you're saying, and somebody might listen to that and be like, wow, so God just has this super low opinion of me. No. What he has is what I understand that you're saying is that he says who I am.
Right. And he made me. He's the one who made me in this.
Right.
And that's what's funny is, like, he can't think less of me. And because of that, like, it gives me the ability to go up.
Right.
It gives me the ability to build this image that I feel like he's made me to be.
Because it's a promise.
Absolutely.
It's built in, because if we're going to believe that what he says is true and infallible, if he tells me that I'm worth something, then I have to be worth something, or I believe in a God that doesn't exist.
Right.
And I can't come to terms, like, I've in all of my best efforts, I have not been able to ever convince myself that God is not my higher power.
Absolutely.
And so I understand what you're saying, that but at the same time, in our brokenness, we look at it and we're like, that's a bunch of bull. Like, either he doesn't know who I am, but once you start to relinquish control of your life and you start to see God providing you with the things that you can't provide for yourself, all of a sudden you get this hope is instilled in you that if this is what God wants me to be, as long as I am willing to be a part of this process, he will provide the way to that person that I cannot do for myself.
Yep. And that's I probably after my 9 months of white knuckling,
Mm-hmm.
I like to say, and I started to live my life at a true surrender point. I started my day, and I still to this day start my day, and I pray for wisdom and favor. That's all I get. I get to pray for wisdom and favor. The rest of it, he's got to figure out, especially when it comes to like the things that I struggle in my life when it comes to expectations. He's got to have the solution. And by surrendering it, that's when I get to leave my irrational thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I get to say, hey, look, it's going to work out, and because I'm not in control of it. And at that point in time, it doesn't mean that I don't have responsibilities. It doesn't mean that I don't have a part in it. But it gives me the ability in God's image of me to move forward. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean by that.
Right.
But he couldn't think less of me. That probably came off really bad.
No, like I understood what you were saying. Like he literally can't, because it's not
in him. It's not his nature.
When he says that this is who you are, mm-hmm. like I said, he can't. We might not be meeting that. We might be living less than what that ideal, and we all do in the grand scheme of things, as long as we are in this world. But it's not us that provides that sense of identity. Yeah. It's not us. And so I understand completely what you're saying, and it's I lose sight of that all the time. And I know I can feel it. I can sense it when I have lost perspective on that, because then all of a sudden the weight of the world falls back on my shoulders, and I'm like, this is not the way this is supposed to be.
Yeah. And someone told me once that I stuck with me. It's like, I'm never going to be perfect. I never will be. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Like if I was perfect, then I wouldn't need God, and that would completely mm-hmm. mess up the whole idea of all of it to begin with. And that's what's crazy is like, it's okay being imperfect.
Right.
It really is. If I was perfect, then I wouldn't have empathy for others. I wouldn't have anywhere to go. What would I do then?
Right. Right. Well, and yeah, man, this could open up a whole different discussion.
Like I said, it pushes that lens is what I truly mean to focus on.
Because it puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, because, before I started this job, anytime there's a big change in my life, especially if it's a change that like is down the road mm-hmm. that I'm approaching, the closer I get to it, the worse my depression gets. And so before starting this job, I was struggling. I was just having a hard time. And God never ceases to amaze me in providing the things for me that I cannot provide for myself. And through a sermon that was taught here at the village, and then a conversation, a word, if you want to, some people call it, from somebody who really didn't know what I was struggling with, was this sense that like struggle is not punishment. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't struggle because of consequences sometimes, but not every time you struggle means, like when you struggle, I tend to assume that means God's mad at me or I'm doing something wrong. No. When you put it in the perspective that God is the one who sets my identity, He is the one who will get me to closer to that identity as long as I am willing to engage in the process, then the struggle has to be a part of that process. And if he has my best, if he knows what he's doing, and he knows he's ordering my steps, and he is providing the way for me, and if it's his will that's being done, then the struggle is just a part of that will. That does not mean that I am failing. It does not mean I'm undermining what he's doing all the time. Now,
and without struggling, how could we be grateful?
Right. It's funny, like, because I beat myself up when I find myself in bad places mm-hmm. mentally, where like I find myself being right. It's like, what did I do wrong? And then that starts this spiral that I think is part of everybody's ever relapsed. I think there's some part of that, right? And
well, I think there's a fine line, and like I said, we're not doctors, but there's a fine line that runs between what we have to do the work in front of us to decide whether or not it's clinical and what's in our brain chemistry is fighting us. And in addition to that, am I working my steps?
Right.
Am I being honest with others and myself? And like I said, if I'm not looking through the right lens in both of those things, I'm going to fail. I'm going to find myself in a place where it's pretty dark.
Right. And before sobriety, struggle to me was a death sentence because that was going to lead me to relapse. It always would. Mm-hmm. And I've talked before about this sense of this other shoe dropping and how I would always self-sabotage. Well, the biggest part of this is that I was not surrendered at that point. And when I would try to get sober before, finally surrendering, because the struggle meant that I was screwing up and the struggle meant that I was doing something wrong, even if I wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so because I was relying on my own power to get me sober, I knew that I would eventually fail, so why try? I might as well just give in now. And so I would blow it up. I'd rather blow it up on my terms than to watch it crumble before me.
Because you're in control then.
Right, yeah. Great job I did with that.
No one can screw it up like we do.
But, to kind of go back to the clinical side, I feel like as much as we do talk about that on the podcast, I feel like we don't talk about it enough because it's so vitally important to talk about that. Both of us struggled with this when we got sober, of realizing that it's easy enough to get your perspective skewed about struggle and about expectations and about where we're at in our life without mental illness. Mm-hmm. Right? We already are pretty good, most of us, at getting in the weeds and then finding ourselves anxious, like, what went wrong? My life's falling apart, even if it's not, right? Even if we understand that we're supposed to, that God's got this. I'm 2.5 years sober. I did not do that on my own willpower. I was engaged with the process that God laid before me because I surrendered to him. And I know that you're the same. But what makes that really hard is if your own brain's trying to fight you. And so I know for me, now that I found clinical help, it's not like it's cured it. It's not like my depression is gone, but I will say what it does do is it makes it manageable in the sense that I can understand. There are times that I can stop, take inventory, reach out, do all the things that I'm supposed to do, call you, call Mitch, come to meetings, work my program, be honest, take stock. And then there are times that I'm like, okay, looking at this, I should not feel the way that I feel. And then I recognize, okay, this is something that is kind of out of this is something going on physiologically that is not in my control. And so I can deal with it. I can come to terms with it, even though I'm still in the middle of struggling with it. And clinically,
from that perspective, like, medicine doesn't, in the same way, it does not solve the problem. Mm-hmm. It makes it manageable, like you said, is because it at least helps me not free fall.
Right.
I don't get the lows that I would find myself in.
Right.
And I don't necessarily get the highs either, because when you're on this roller coaster of emotions, literally, mm-hmm. this roller coaster of emotions, it slows down. Everything's a straight path. You know what I mean? And I get small dips and sometimes small highs, and that's great. But it's not uncontrollable then at that point.
Right.
And it's not like my depression goes away. It's not like my anxiety goes away. Mm-hmm. It just gives me at least enough space and enough of a breath to at least have the perspective to think about my emotions. It's not just one controlling thought that just leads me to this dark, dark place. I have this one bad thought, this one irrational thought, and I at least have the time to stop and think about it, and go, okay, like I can at least have the power and the wisdom to say, hey, is that right? Is it wrong?
Right.
Like, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, and it's tough to come to terms with.
But then that plays into control, because it's my character. It's in my character to want to control the situation. Right. It's like, okay, well, how do I feel about that? Because I don't have control over that.
It gives me enough of a moment of clarity to kick into motion
what the steps have taught you.
All of the tools that I have through my recovery.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that includes calling. I mean, we talk all the time. You and I will either at the end of the day, or we'll just be chit chatting, and you'll be like, "Man, my depression is kicking my ass today," and I'll have days where I'm like, "Dude, I am just eating it. Like I just am struggling today," and like I said, that would have been a death sentence for me in my recovery before now.
Oh, I'd find myself in the bottle of multiple bottles.
Right.
Real quick.
Right.
It would have given me a better reason. I mean, honestly, that's all it would have done.
Yeah. And so, but like, again, if you're listening to this and you're struggling with mental health, especially if you're struggling with mental health and working a program, like, we're not doctors. We're not telling you what to do, but be open to it. Yeah. Be open to, and whatever excuse that you may have about why you shouldn't go to the doctor, here's the thing. It is as important as any other part of your recovery, the clinical side, if you need it. You know, like, it is as important. It is as important to take care of yourself physically and physiologically as it is, and mentally. And this is not just medication. This could be therapy. This could be whatever. As it is for you to attend meetings and have a sponsor and work the steps, and all of those things that we talk about on the podcast, it is just as important. So if that's something that you're kind of wishy-washy about, like, I would encourage you, at least be open to it. At least, start thinking about it and be open to the idea of seeking out some professional help.
And for me, like I said, I went through recovery for a long time before I decided to go get some clinical help. Before I had an honest and open conversation with my doctor about it, at some recommendations of other people. And I mean, the minute that I talked to my doctor, he's like, "Yeah, it kind of sounds like the definition there."
Right.
And it was like, "Oh, okay." And it was a process for sure, just as much of a process as it was for me working my steps in my recovery. But it's been nothing but helpful. Right. You know what I mean? It's, once again, it's not a solution.
Right.
It's just there to help me.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And when he means by recommendation, it was me going like, I swear to God, if you talk to me one more time about your anxiety, but you don't go talk to a doctor, I'm going to kill you. Like, dude, like, engage, like, just take the step to go. And yeah. And I'm not saying I told you so, but if you want to have that internal conversation with yourself.
You mean like when you said, "Hey, like, hold on to that thought about not drinking again"?
Yeah. Man, listen.
You didn't say it told you so.
My wisdom is only matched by my immense humility.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, listen, man, that was a great conversation, and I really appreciate you pinch hitting with this. And honestly, I think it was God's way of putting in what needed to be said. I think there's somebody that's going to need to hear this. So
absolutely, I can't wait to be back on it. But I like to just say, like this, I love the fact that this was the topic today, because this is one of the things that's like near and dear to my character defects. Actually, not heart, but character defects for sure. Is that like working this program, having accountability partners like you, and my higher power is the leading reason for my life now. That's where I get hope now. That's where I get to have a future. And it's all those different pieces put together. And without all that, without my higher power, without recovery, I wouldn't be able to have a relationship with my wife or my kids or my family or my coworkers or even you. I couldn't do any of that. And like it started with me having that open and honest conversation. And that's all I think that anyone in recovery needs to start with. Right. Don't make it into something that it doesn't need to be. It just starts with honesty.
It's perfect. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I normally, at the end of episodes, say, "Hey, is there anything you want to say to anybody listening?" But that pretty much nails it. Yeah. So look at that, man. He was all like, he was all like, "I don't know what I'm doing." I'm like, "You're going to be fine." Yeah, you did great, man.
You mean a rational thought?
Yeah. It's work in progress.
Nailed it.
Work in progress. Well, hey, thank you, everybody who's listening. Again, please, if you want to support the channel, whatever platform you listen on, engage with whatever, like subscribing, sharing, rating, all of that stuff helps immensely. So I appreciate all the support thus far. It's been great. And I hope this episode finds whoever needs to hear it, because I think a lot of us struggle with this exact topic. So thank you, Kyle. You're awesome. I
Thank
love
you.
you. He's definitely going to be on again. It was long overdue.
Absolutely.
So we've got a bunch of episodes. I've kind of lost track at this point. I think we're up to 11 or 12 now. Crazy to think about. So go check those out. Go check those out and hear me struggle with English even more. And then, we release episodes every Sunday evening. So keep an eye out for those. And see you guys next time.